How can India make it to a Football World Cup for the first time in history? Awakening the Blue Tigers, co-authored by Neel Shah, a sports management journalist, attempts and analyzes the contemporary scene in Indian football and offers a step-by-step guide into how India can edge their way to footballing dreamland. The author, Gaurav Gala, is a founding member of the ISL and has since 2013 been exclusively working on football and looking to grow the world's most popular sport in India through content creation and a fan engagement across live broadcast, OTT, and social media. On the panel, we have with us Mr. Ravi Puskur, recently appointed as CEO of FC Goa. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a huge round of applause for him today? Ravi has been with FC Goa for over 8 years. Also on the panel, we have Raj Athwal, Club President, Odisha FC, who comes with rich European experience, having worked with sides like Glasgow Rangers, Coventry City, and Watford. And moderating the session is sports broadcaster Sreeduth Pillai. I'd request all of you to please give our panelists today a huge round of applause for sparing time and joining us today for this wonderful session. I'll request Sreeduth to kindly take over.
It's a very mouth-watering prospect. So there are times that are a little like an advertisement. When you watch a match, you don't want them, but then sometimes they are a necessary evil. People ask me, what's the best time to visit Kerala, my home state? And I say during the Football World Cup. Because you travel from one end to the other, not a big state. You see the Ronaldos, the Messis, the Neymars, right? When do we see, and of course, we can't say Sandesh Jinkan, but when do we see the cutouts of Indian players, and can we see that in 2034? That's a question we're gonna spend some time on. So Gaurav, to start with you, is that a reality or is just wishful thinking?
Okay, firstly, thank you so much, and thank you so much for the organizers for recognizing the book, the sport, and for assembling a wonderful panel here. Welcome to Raj and Ravi as well. I'm genuinely very, very optimistic about football. It's the sport that is closest to my heart, which is why I think I decided to write a book on it. And I think it's one of the most popular sports in the world, played by just about everybody. I think the barriers to the sport are very little. All you need is a ball to kick around with, which is why we see so much participation in the sport. And that is why I feel, that the future is bright. I feel very, very optimistic about football, and lots of reasons for that.
Right.
And I think whether it's 20 years or whether it's 40 years, I think in my lifetime now, I am very optimistic that India can qualify for a FIFA World Cup. Maybe 15 years ago, if you had asked me this question when I was very actively involved in journalism, covering lots of sports around the world, and here in India, the answer would have been, maybe I would have been a bit more cynical. And my answer would have been, we'd be lucky in my lifetime if we could qualify.
Right.
But now, having worked in football exclusively for the last 10 years, and seeing the sport and the ecosystem firsthand, having interacted with a lot of different stakeholders within this ecosystem, I genuinely feel that within my lifetime,
right,
we can qualify.
Right, wonderful. Before I come to Raj, Ravi, congratulations on taking over as the CEO recently. The 10th year of the ISL. It was one of those things I clearly remember, 2014, 13, 14, started talking about it, at least in the media. The standard of Indian football is going to be lifted, and we're going to be world class. We are a decade into it. Very pragmatically look at it. Has it really contributed to Indian football in general?
Has it contributed to Indian football? I think without a doubt.
Okay.
Because take, say, 10 years ago, most names that are now perhaps household names in Indian football, people would not be able to recognize them then. Now, say, if Sandesh Jinkan is to walk into this room, everybody in this room would immediately recognize who he is.
Right.
10 years ago, if an Indian player from the national team walked in into this room, some people might just be oblivious to who that person might be. right? So it's definitely done that. It's
Right.
definitely infiltrated a lot more households.
Right.
It's made the sport a lot more accessible,
Right.
because of the amount of energy that went into ensuring that the league was given a platform that allowed it to reach all the households. And you can see the difference in the talent as well. The number of players that are now coming through who are able to compete at a far higher level than before, right? There's Indian clubs going and competing in the AFC Champions League, which at one point was almost untouchable. And then if you see clubs like even Odisha as well, congratulations to them, when they just recently qualified for intercontinental playoff as well, right? So which means Indian clubs are able to compete and show that they are capable of going and competing at the highest level. Importantly, I think the one other thing that we need to notice is the performance of the national team as well. I think in 2014, if my memory serves me well, India's ranking was 175. We're in the early hundreds now, so which means there is some progress in that stage, right? There's still a lot of work to be done. I think we're just at the nascent stage of development of football in the country. But initial sort of process that's happened and the beginning and the foundation that it's given, I think that's a good way for us to sort of move forward. And I think the ISL did help that to a large extent.
Raj, your experience with English football, and when you come to India and compare, there's no comparison per se, but what are the areas that you feel we need to address as quickly as we could to get ourselves to a level which is a few notches higher?
Well, firstly, welcome to everyone, and thank you to the organisers for inviting me. It's a privilege to be here and amongst with Ravi and Gaurav. I made a few points because I've only been in India for 3 years, and I can only give you my observations based on my 3 years here. So, firstly, there are several aspects that I feel need to be perhaps addressed or certainly looked upon, and certainly from the under 6 to under 12s, 13s, there has to be an infrastructure across all the football clubs, across all the countries now. Ravi on my right hand side, FC Go have done a phenomenal job. One or two other clubs have. We started our program last season, but it's still not enough. And you also need good coaches. You also need the kids to enjoy themselves and not be rigid. Then there's from the under 18s to under 23s. There's a gap there that I've identified, and I feel that you can't just play state championships for a month, etc. There has to be a robust reserve league, but then it all comes down to money as well. But over and above that, I think we also have to look at from a national. Is this still working? Yeah. Now with the national team, I had this out with Igor a few weeks ago when they were in Bhubaneswar, and I said, look, you're in the top 100, it's fantastic, and of course we want to continue to progress, but in my opinion, why are we not playing the better teams, the top 50, the top 60 teams? And I'll give you an idea. Turkey in 1984 played England in the World Cup, and they lost 8-0. They came back I think in 85, they lost again. In 87, they lost 8-0 again. After that moment, now the results are like 1-0, 2-1, 0-0. If you really want to enhance the national team and you really want to see development, then you've got to have the temerity to say, let's take that risk, irrespective of what people will think. And the nation has to get behind everyone, which obviously includes all the authorities, etc. But I think what's also important is that I was in Saudi Arabia recently. The amount of congratulations I'm getting from everybody, not just Odisha, but Indian football in general.
Right.
I also feel that if, as an analogy, if the world is working at 20 miles an hour, we have to work at 50, 60 to catch up.
Right.
We can't work at the same rate. So there's a number of aspects that I feel need addressing from my observation of 3 years.
Right. And before coming to Gaurav back, just taking a cue from what he said, getting blanked by a team, 8-0, 10-0, the two schools of thought that one can relate to. One is take baby steps, one step at a time. You play and look at Asia and maybe teams that are slightly better and build on. Because when you take on a giant, it can have a severe beating. I remember Bayern Munich coming to India for the farewell match of Baichung Bhutia. We were blanked 6-0. I mean, what's your take on this? I mean, should we take those baby steps or should we take a plunge deep down?
Look, I think you've got to find the balance between both, right?
Right.
While it's good that you try and sort of set benchmarks by playing against the very best in the world and get an understanding of where your own ecosystem and your own footballing level is at, it's also important that you also continue to develop You need young kids to be passionate about the sport, and that only happens when the national team or club sides are performing well.
Right,
So
right.
if the club sides get constantly blanked 8-0, 9-0, or the national team also gets blanked in a similar number, then you begin to feel like maybe this is a sport that is well beyond our reach.
Right.
And obviously that can't happen. You need
Right.
to create that aspiration. And aspiration only happens when there are heroes sticking out.
Right,
And that
right.
happens when the national team delivers, and as do the club sides.
Right. Gaurav, yeah.
No, I just wanted to add a point to the question you asked Ravi and then the question you asked to Raj as well.
Please.
I think the one thing you've got to look at is the confidence of the players within the ecosystem that we now have.
Let's come to that.
To what we had maybe 15, 20 years ago.
Right.
I think, and Raj spoke about playing those competitive matches against higher ranked opponents.
Right.
But at the same time, if you've got those better professionals sitting with you week in, week out in the dressing room and playing alongside you in each and every training session as well, I
Right.
think that makes a big difference.
Right.
Now, the difference that I see when I was a journalist, the body language of the Indian players, the confidence levels of the Indian players, not just on the pitch but off the pitch as well, the way they would communicate with you, all of that has changed. In the last 10 years, I've visibly and actively seen it firsthand, the confidence of these players.
Yeah.
And that comes from playing alongside and against opponents
Right.
who are of a higher caliber,
Right.
who've played the game at a higher level, and I think that has rubbed off onto a lot of these youngsters who are now coming through. And obviously with the ISL coming, more slots have opened up for them to actually play at the top tier within the
Right.
country alongside the I-League.
Right.
And I think all of this has led to this optimism that I was talking about
Right.
earlier.
Awakening the Blue Tigers, when you talk about that, your book, when I went through your book, one thing is the kind of emotion that one feels, truly, because in my childhood we had the Santosh Trophy, the Federation Cup and all of that, and Durand Cup, for example. But that has been slight. We do, but then how many people watch and how many people know of is a different question altogether. Now, talking about the complex that is set in, I mean, the one thing about the book is it has broken a lot of myths, like Indians didn't want to wear the boots and all of that. The fact is that we wanted to preserve our players for the Asian Games
And the Olympics.
and the Olympics, and not taking the risk of sending them for a World Cup. But it has set us back forever. And how do we overcome that, if I can use the word or phrase, inferiority complex?
Okay, so I don't agree with the term of it being an inferiority complex. I think if I was to, if I was to look at it from, the federation back then and their decision not to go for the FIFA World Cup, it was very simple. In the 50s, the Olympic Games were the bigger event.
Right.
They were the more prestigious event.
Right.
And we prioritized the Olympic Games. It was as simple as that. It had nothing to do with playing bare feet. It had nothing to do with traveling all the way to
Right.
South America. It was
Right.
simply to do with the fact that the priority was the Olympic Games.
Right.
And that is the reason why we did not participate in the FIFA World Cup. I think sitting now and saying that it set us back, I think is not right. I think at that point in time, the decision to play in the Olympic Games was well founded because we went on to do well in those games, right? I think we came fourth, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
So, and we were the dominant team in Asia at that point in time. So all of those decisions were correct in my opinion.
Right.
I think there were a lot of other factors involved with
Right.
why
Right.
football, say, did not go the way of cricket, and there's a chapter in the book on cricket as well, and how the success story of cricket. I mean, for me, cricket was the right sport. In cricket we talk about timing.
Right, right.
Cricket, I think the timing with cricket, with them doing what they did in 1983 and then us hosting a World Cup 4 years later, then the economy opening up 4 years after that in 1991 and the money coming in. I think all of that, the timing was just perfect for them.
Right.
And which is why I think cricket lucked out a little as well.
Right.
At the same time, at the cable revolution, the number of TV households went up around the country, awareness, commercialization came in. So all of those things helped cricket. Had football been in the same situation.
Right.
Let's say we won an Asian Games in the Asian Cup in, say, the early 80s. then maybe hosted an event 4 years later.
Right.
Football could have gone down that route, I feel.
Right. And I'm sure in the 1950s when they took the decision, they wouldn't have thought that it's going to set us back. I mean, it is a temporary one, but then it has had a long-lasting effect. Again, coming back to the same experience I'm alluding to, English football and here, culturally, we talk about sport and professionals talk about culture. So culturally, what do we Indians need to do differently? Of course, we have the infrastructure coming in, we have the coaches and all those things, but culturally, what do we need to do, Raj?
I think Gaurav touched on the subject of cricket, and last week was a great example in Saudi Arabia where they said congratulations to the Isha, great to see Indian football progress. How do you cope with the enormity of cricket? And I think firstly we've got to smash that myth. We should draw inspiration from cricket and use that as a benchmark. But I'm saying to people that cricket is popular. It's of course it is. But if you look at the numbers that follow football, whether it's a premiership, whether it's international football from India, you look at certain pockets across India. We're talking hundreds of millions of people that follow football. But that narrative never comes across. So culturally, if you look at England now, I'll give you my example. Yes, football is the number one sport. Since you're born, you're given a football. But cricket and rugby are equally popular and survive amongst football.
Right.
And they've both won World Cups. So what I'm saying is football can exist. We have to change the narrative in India. And people like Ravi and Gaurav and others have done a phenomenal job. But we need the authorities and right from the top for everybody to work together, and all the state governments. I mean, you've seen what the Odisha government have done. We have probably the best training facilities in the country, the best stadiums. The infrastructure here is incredible, and it's on par with European clubs, by the way. So I can give you that comparison. So I think there's a lot of areas that we need to change, but I don't think we should just look at cricket and say that's it. It's not. Trust me, there's hundreds of millions of people who watch football in India, and we should have to change the narrative.
Right. The guy who's leading the show, the two things that we often get, and I experience a little bit of clash. One is what we need to do, and sometimes what we do, and in between comes the economics of it. Since you are the helm and in charge of that, how do you strike a balance between the two? Sometimes these are in two different directions, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean that's the sort of the holy grail, isn't it, in football? Trying to find the balance between developing talent, but also at the same time being relevant by being competitive and right at the very top. Because being competitive and right at the very top builds fan affinity.
Right.
When you have fans coming in, then you have culture building.
Right.
But culture building can also happen in another way, which is by developing talent at a young age. Where's the one place that parents will never cease to sort of invest in? It's in their kids, right? They will do everything to go over and beyond for their children. So if a child begins to play football from the age of 4 up until 12, and he sees, and the parents see that there is some talent in the boy or the girl, they will invest even more to ensure that he gets or she gets the best of opportunities going further forward. When that happens, talent automatically begins to sort of stand out, right? That's when the cream rises to the top. And that's what needs to happen in football a lot more. Unfortunately, in India, we're picking up football a little too late, right? The motor skills, the neuro skills, all develop at a much younger age. So when that begins to happen, when football is considered a sport which is accessible and easy to get to, and there is organization within the pyramid, then you'll see a change in the culture automatically.
Right.
Yeah. If I could just add to the whole, the point on culture. It begins very early, as Ravi said, and just to give you a few, examples from my own life. My formative years were in London. I went to school there, primary school, did my GCSEs there. And within 3 weeks of the family landing in London, me joining a school, my primary school class teacher called my father to school. And, so I was, really scared. I was like, I haven't even made too many friends yet. I don't even know what's happening properly, new country. Why is my father being called to school? To my surprise, and I was pleasantly surprised, my primary school teacher called my father to school because he had seen me in 2 PE sessions, physical education sessions. And he said, your son is very good at cricket.
Right.
Because having, spent a few years in India, I would play cricket. And And he called my father, he said, I know you're new to the country. I know this is the area that you live in London. Within a 2-mile radius, these
Right.
are 3 cricket clubs, local cricket clubs that I'm giving you the address.
Right.
Please take your son there, get him to start playing cricket. And within 6 months of me joining that club, I was playing under 10, under 11 county cricket for Middlesex.
Right.
So culturally, the push that one gets
Right. Right.
in a country like England, where sports is extremely important, even in the school curriculum,
Right.
I think that's where it starts. It starts right from the base level. And I think it needs to start from home as well.
Right.
Another example I want to give you of how I think the culture is changing is in my age group, my friends, we're all parents now. I have a 15-year-old daughter at home. My friends have kids in the same age group. And a lot of them have come to me and said, our son plays in the school football team. Our son plays in this academy. It's a pay-to-play academy. We think he's good. What do you think we should do? These were conversations that were not happening 3, 4, 5 years ago. But now every second parent that I interact with, I interacted with one last night, and they said our son or our daughter wants to play football. So much so that they're asking, what do we need to do as parents in the next 4 or 5 years to see whether our kids are good enough to maybe take up the sport, in a big way, and whether we can invest in it. So they're looking at football now as a career option, which I think is the beginning of the cultural change that you speak about.
Right. You did mention, Raj, about the importance of playing in every nook and corner of the country. If you look at countries that have made progress in the last couple of decades, for instance, many of them have players who play across the globe, various leagues and seasons. And if you look at IPL, so what changed Indian cricket, in my opinion, is the fact that we started rubbing shoulders with the best in the business, playing for the different franchises here. So the fear of an Australian giant or a British giant, it stopped. We give it back now, even in terms of sledging, because of the cultural sensitization and the familiarity, and of course we are exposed to the best in the world. It's only fair to say that probably we'll have to wait for some more time for ISL to do the same to Indian football, number one. Number two, is an ISL enough for us to create that kind of, superior talent, or rather develop the talent, I should say? Or how important is it for Indian footballers to get exposed to the different leagues, the top leagues across the globe?
It's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
But no, good points. Can I just make a point what Gaurav said there?
Right.
In England, the culture is sports. When it's boys or girls, the moment you're at school, you're encouraged to play whatever sport you decide, and most boys play for pretty much 90%. But whatever sport you're into, you're encouraged. There's a lot of extracurricular activities, after school programs, and it's seen as working alongside your education, because it brings out a number of qualities through sports. But going back to your question, when I was, I'm only giving you an example of Saudi Arabia, and I was talking to the CEO of Al Nassr last week, and he said to me, we have no infrastructure below the first team. They're still going to develop their grassroots. There's a lot of areas, but they're throwing money. And I said, with Cristiano Ronaldo, what's the game here? What's going on? And he said, we're here for the long haul. Saudi Arabia want to totally change their perception of football. And they said, we can either spend hundreds of millions of pounds on advertising and get nowhere, or we took it. It's not a gamble. They decided to buy Cristiano. They decided to invest, and other players are starting to follow suit. I know European leagues are now looking at how do we work around this, because they can afford to, but so can India. What I've seen in India is there is a phenomenal amount of money. I'm not saying suddenly start straight away tomorrow, start bringing these players over to India, but maybe we need to change the way we think, because I could be wrong here, but what I feel that I've learned from the last 3 years, that as a culture we tend to follow winners, and there's a difference in England. I'm a Coventry City fan. We've had our ups and downs, but I won't stop following them, and my children, I make sure they follow them. So where here in this country I feel with cricket, winning the World Cup in '83, it just totally boomed. And unless you're a winner, nobody really wants to know. This is my feeling, I could be totally wrong here, and this is what I've learned. So we need to almost change that culture. You're only going to get one winner in the league, one cup winner. So I feel culturally we need to start bringing the kids in, and I think what Ravi alluded to earlier, culturally changing the perception of parents and the kids to start thinking about football. But I would also look at bringing a better standard of play from overseas. Most players are from League Two, Spain, League One if you're lucky, the odd one from La Liga, but you might be in his mid to late 30s. But it costs money, and that's where we've got to look at all angles. So I haven't got a really straightforward answer, but there's a lot of areas that we need to consider. And I do genuinely believe that if local state governments can help football clubs as well, it would also help precipitate change in India. Because as I said, there's hundreds of millions of people are watching the game, and this is a fact as well. Speaking to Richard Arnold, who's the current, I think he's one of the CEO of Manchester United. Did you know that outside of Manchester, their biggest retailer is in India? Believe it or not. So there is a market for football here, 100%. And every country wants to get into India, but we have to firstly decide what we want to do.
Ravi, if I
can just add on to Raj's point there, the one thing that he said, that there's that winning mentality that needs to be developed, and sort of, people look towards winners and everything. And again, what he mentioned about the foreigners that come into India, I think where you will see a big change in Indian football is when India begins to become an exporting country rather than importing country. Right now we're importing a lot of good talent.
Right.
The day an Indian footballer cracks, say, the European League, or even at a high level Asian League, say the Saudi League or the Qatar Stars League, or maybe even the A-League, then immediately a lot of eyeballs go in that direction. Right? Like you mentioned in cricket, the guys are not afraid of rubbing shoulders with the very best in the world. The same thing happens. An Indian player cracks the class ceiling that is currently set to just Indian football. That's when you'll see a noticeable difference, because then it's just way beyond, because everybody else in every other parts of the world will realize how big an impact this can have. I mean, example is Hidetoshi Nakata. When he went from Japan to Italy, along with him went his family and 45 Japanese journalists who just constantly followed him around just to find out every little thing he was doing, because it's completely different, right? It's completely new that a Japanese footballer will break the class ceiling. So the day an Indian football player breaks that class ceiling and goes on to play in a European or a top league tournament in, say, South America or Asia, that's when you'll see a drastic difference, because then you have a role model. You have somebody whose poster can be pinned onto your walls constantly.
If I may request you to step outside the shoes of a CEO and be an Indian football fan who has a know-how and who's heading a club, what would be the structural changes?
I was going to say, I think he's a football fan first, then he's a CEO after.
No, purely as a football fan. So what are the structural changes that you would like to see in the Indian footballing system now?
So, as a footballing fan, the one thing I would like to see is more robust competition. Right now, the league runs, but it's sort of start, stop. We're playing the league for too little amount of time, right? So, for example, if I'm an FC Goa fan, I'm going to the stadium, say, the first week of, say, September, to watch the first home game of the season.
Right.
The next time I'm probably interacting with the club again is in October, in the first week of October. So that means that's an entire month of me being unable to interact with my local team, at least watching it. Because ultimately, yes, there's grassroots, there's youth development and all that, but your premium product is the first team, right? So if I'm able to access the team a lot more, it becomes a ritual. Why is it a culture in England? Because every Saturday and Sunday, every dad knows that he wakes up and he takes his son to the 3 o'clock kickoff or the evening kickoff, and there's even journeys that they undertake to go to different parts of the country, right? That's culture. So if I feel like on every Saturday and Sunday, it's a ritual for me to go and watch my local football team play. It doesn't have to be in the ISL, it can even be in the I-League, or it can even be in the I-League second division.
Right.
The journey itself of the hardship of having to go from the lower leagues right up to the top is actually just as good as winning the thing right to the very top as well.
Right.
So when that is developed, that's when you'll see a lot more investment in sort of, interest in Indian football from the local fan.
Right. Gaurav, we talk Indian football, we talk ISL. And of course the kids walk around, in the Manchester United jerseys and, across the Serie A or La Liga or whatever. How important is it for us to revive, in your view, the old tournaments which had that glaze about them earlier? As you mentioned, the Santosh Trophy, for example, you wouldn't believe I was sitting with the goalkeeper who won the Santosh Trophy in a penalty shootout. Nobody recognized him, and he had to literally beg for a flight because he had to play a match the next day, and I had to intervene and get it done for him. Not saying, but that's not ideally what we want. So we talk about, just combine one more thing. You said, interestingly in your book there is a chapter on cricket. And we talk about, okay, cricket should not be left alone. We have to look at cricket and learn. But if you were to suggest 2-3 practical things where how we can learn from cricket, what would those points be?
So there are two things. I'll keep it short because I mean there's lots of things we can learn from cricket. I think the first thing is, and you spoke about the old tournaments and whether we should revive them. I think the name on the tournament doesn't really matter. I think it's participation is the most important thing. Whether you're a 5-year-old kid kicking the ball about in a park outside your house, or whether you're a 15-year-old youngster looking to break into a professional club, or whether you're a 25-year-old professional player, looking to make football, play for the country and then win as many trophies as possible. I think participation is the most important thing, and I think in football now, we are seeing a lot of participation. I was recently at a school in Delhi interacting with class 5 and class 6 students. There were 50 kids in the class. I asked each and every one of those kids, what sport do you watch? What sport do you play? It was a mixed gender class. So there were equal amount of girls and boys.
Right.
5 out of those 50 said that they watch and play cricket. 13 said that we play badminton, we don't get to watch as much of it, and a lot of them were girls.
Right.
33 kids said we watch and we play football.
Right.
So participation, I think, in this sport is going in the right direction.
Right.
And I think that is something that we need to first nurture at the base level. Coming to the second point, and I think Raj touched upon it, is competitive football and organizing so the word that we all keep hearing a lot is grassroots.
Yeah.
Right? Grassroots is just an initiation into the sport. It's something that starts maybe at the age of 3, 4 and is over by the time you turn 8 or 9. Grassroots is done. After that, what is really important in the term we need to in India really look at is youth development. Right? So youth development needs an organized structure of competition. If our young players who've come through the grassroots, who've gone to say the Basa Academy or any other pay-to-play academy or even for their school team, if those youngsters, after they finish their grassroots level training, are not getting enough competitive matches, they're going to fall by the wayside. And only the lucky few, right, and I use the word lucky very deliberately here, will make it to become professionals. So that organizing that competitive youth development competition structure is very important. I think one of the biggest tournaments in that age group is currently run by the Air Force. What we need are all of our professional clubs at all tiers in the football pyramid to actively get young players to play. I think playing and participating is really important. And I think that's something that cricket has done really well. The reason I say that is that look at the under-19 Indian cricket team, right? The number of World Cups we've won, the number of players that have come through that we've seen, winning those tournaments, whether it's a Virat Kohli or whether it's Ravindra Jadeja and so on and so forth. There's so many of them and we've done really well. The reason is that the coach of that team has a pool of 500 to 600 players
to select from.
And why does he have so many players? Because they've all grown up together. They've played possibly 300, 400, 500 cricket matches in a competitive environment since the age of 10, 12, 13. Right? In football, we had the FIFA Under-17 World Cup that took place in India in 2017. That the coach did not have anywhere near that number of players to choose from. In fact, in India, we picked the squad 2 years earlier and sent them out for exposure trips. If that same coach had 200 players to choose from just before the tournament was to start, I think is the right way to go. Right?
Absolutely.
So for me, I think organizing that structure and borrowing again from cricket is something that is very important.
Raj, we talk football, World Cup football, when will India play? We talk men's football. But personally, I feel maybe the women can play before men do to represent India. What's your take on women's football in the country?
Women's football actually is, I feel, has internationally is far beyond men's football. I mean, you've got players now playing in Europe. And it goes back to what I think Ravi said earlier, was that's the moment you've broken it. And the women's football, I think, I don't know where they are in the rankings, but they're quite high.
Right.
50 odd, so that's incredible. And yet, I look at the infrastructure in India, and it's probably not even anywhere near the men's professional game, which is a shame, actually. I can only draw on my experience as Odisha Football Club. We started our women's professional team last season, and we ensured, right across the board, that the facilities and the whole infrastructure was similar to the men's. But from a women's perspective, that's a really good point. They are beyond the men's, yet the resources are a fraction of what they get.
Right.
So where we take it from there, I'm not sure, but there needs to be a lot more, perhaps a lot more revenue thrown at that, and for these girls to be role models for kids across the state. A number of girls that we talked on last season from Odisha and this season, many of them are actually earning money and sending it back home. So it's almost giving them an aspiration and an opportunity to better themselves and to help their families. But their families now see a pathway for them that actually, if they become international, they can make a life for themselves.
Right.
Which will change their culture as well.
Right. We're not left with much time, but one question, anyone can take this. If you look at Indian football, it's very similar to a lot of other Indian sports, wherein tennis, for example, we have had junior champions, Wimbledon champions, US Open, and there's a lot of talent, potential, and promise. But once they come to that fact, or the business end of it, if I can call it that way, it just withers away. So if you can be good at 15, 16, 17, what prevents you from being equally good and compete when you are 21, 22? So what happens in between, and what is that we need to do to guard ourselves against the dropping of standards when it comes to the highest level?
So again, I'd beg to differ. I think what we are seeing now, especially in football, is that kids who are coming through the system, because of that confidence that I spoke about earlier,
right.
When they get into, say, an FC Goa dressing room or an Odisha FC dressing room, and they see the caliber of players that are sitting next to them, or the caliber of players that they're going to be playing against, they're no longer going to hide behind the desk or the chair. They are willing to go out there and express themselves.
Right.
I think that confidence is something that is prevalent in this country now, not just in the sports sphere. I think as a country, we are a much more, stronger and I think more expressive country.
More confident?
More confident, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that kind of seeps into every aspect of our lives. I think, whether it's economic development, infrastructure development, or what have you. And for me, I think as you get older, you begin to hit your peak in sports.
Right.
So a 15-year-old, once he turns 25 or 27, is in his peak. And I think with football, we are seeing that. There are players who are growing up in front of us, whether they are playing in the I-League or in the ISL, and we're seeing them. And there's one player in particular that I'll take an example of. His name was mentioned right at the start of this conversation, Sandesh Chingal. Yeah. Right? He was the emerging player in the opening season of the ISL.
Right, he was.
He then went on to make his debut for the national team.
Yes.
And has since then become a mainstay in the national team.
He captained the side as well.
Absolutely. And he's now a household name.
Right.
There are many others who are following in his footsteps. Right? Who've come through, whether through the I-League or whether through, clubs further down the football pyramid in, say, the Northeast, which provides so many budding players for our football ecosystem in this country. So I think, players as they get older begin to find their peak, they get more confident, and I think that's something we're seeing with a lot of our athletes.
You guys agree?
Yeah, I mean, if I can just add on to what about Sandesh, because I see him up and close on a daily basis now when he's with the club. And there's a marked difference between the Sandesh Chingan that I'd heard of back in 2014 to the Sandesh Chingan that there is now. It's not about his footballing skill, it's just about his demeanor. The way he approaches the sport, the way he approaches his life in general, and the way he carries himself is very different. And I think that has a lot to do with his footballing journey. because he started out in Kerala, and in Kerala football is a sport that needs no introduction, right?
Right.
So that weight of expectation forced him to adapt his mentality and develop it and fortify it even further than before. So that sort of that constant pressure on him, then having to go and play with the national team and lead the defensive line in the national team. Before that, he was a player who was the backup centre back. He had other seniors to fall back upon. When he had to pick up the mantle of becoming the leader in the national team, he did with aplomb, right? So that is the one big difference that I see. And you know what? I've noticed that since he's come in, he's now beginning to infect the other players with that same energy as well. The younger players now go to him and seek his advice, because now this is the guy that you look up to. And he's not very shy about passing on information, advice, and sort of sharing his own experiences. And I think that's the one big difference. Because there's somebody who's been exposed to it, he's able to pass that on. And now you see that gradually the younger players as well. I mean, the players who played in the Under-17 World Cup,
Right.
they carry themselves about with their chin held up high. Like, they are players who say, look, I've rubbed shoulders with the very best players in the world who are playing in the Premier League right now. So if I can do that at that age, why can't I do it now?
Right. And first to put a hard stop here, it's over to the audience. If you want to ask any question to Ravi, Raj and Gaurav, I'm sure you have plenty of questions. Your turn, please.
You're having fun with this, which is very required. And second, congratulations that you're pretty young people sitting there. So that gives a lot of hope.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
My question is, like you rightly said, that the mindset shift that needs to happen in the legacy mentorship is what you're talking about. That is great to hear. But what I have seen, my son is very interested in football, and that is why I'm here as a parent. The kind of exposure which is given, like he was mentioning, Gaurav was mentioning, for the grassroots level is really, really not very well. But what about the midland? You know, what exposure, because he can give up for the summer camp. But after that, there is nowhere to go. And people would answer my question as to how do I get a coach and how do I get him ready. So, what is it that we can do? The first question is, what is it that we can do to look after potential players from this level onwards? He's 9 years old, perfect time to catch him. Second is, what, because there is a limit for us to be also going, because we are in the mid-range. So what is the kind of support that is going to be given for him to be learning and training, not only him, but everybody in this age, from the best? Because again, like Raj was mentioning, everything is about investment. So what is it that we can do regarding that? So that's my question to the forum. Thank you.
So who do you want to answer this question? Anyone can take it. Yeah.
I'd go to Ravi and Raj because I think they're in the perfect position to kind of fill that gap that you speak about. So Ravi and Raj, over to you guys.
Yeah. There's two aspects that I see to that is that firstly, at 9 years of age, he should be enjoying himself. So from a young age, it shouldn't be about, I'm going to become a professional player. So what we try and do now at Odisha, and we're relatively new to Bhubaneswar, is that from under 6 to 12s, we've now, it's got to be fun. The kids have got to express themselves and not feel they're coming home and they're not good enough. And then from 12 onwards, again, you're learning the basic qualities, but schools have a role to play as well. So it shouldn't just be down to the football clubs. The schools should also be encouraging the kids to play. But what I would certainly say to the parents is not to expect their children to be professional footballers. We all want that. I wanted that for my kids. But just so you know, 0.1% of academy kids will ever make it as professional footballers, and I'm sure it's no different in India. The key is that they enjoy themselves. So going back to your question, I think the schools have a part to play, the football clubs do. We should, certainly from my perspective, we'd like to emulate what Goa do, what Bengaluru do, because they have camps going on all year round, and I'm sure Ravi will allude to that shortly. And so the kids should be able to have access anytime, enjoy it, but the coaching equally has to be of a high standard, because we were finding that certain coaches were maybe D-licensed and it's not the highest, and kids were running around not enjoying themselves. So there has to be you have to strike a balance, and that's how I see it, really, quite frankly. So and if you are from Odisha, by the way, please get in touch. More than happy to take your story.
Ravi?
Sure. I mean, first let me begin by congratulating you because knowing unknowingly you're actually your son's first coach because you've given him that exposure to the sport, and sort of you coming in here and asking these questions makes it all the more prevalent. And we had a room full of parents like you. Trust me, we'd be a much stronger sporting nation to begin with. And in terms of sort of what he needs to do, so I think you've played your role very well in terms of ensuring that he gets exposure and sort of an introduction to the sport. I think after that, if I'm being very honest, local FAs, football clubs, the state authorities, the government, this is where we need to sort of put our hand up and help it by creating that pyramid that we were talking about, right? The part where Gaurav mentioned about youth development, that's what needs to happen, and that cannot happen with an individual stakeholder. So it's not just FC Goa doing it or Odisha doing it in silos. Everybody has to work together. There's no point in FC Goa having 20 great players if there's no Odisha to compete against, right? And this needs to happen not just at a local level but also at a national level, right? Because that's when you create the pyramid. That's when your child gets to test himself against the very best, going stage by stage, and you get to genuinely see how far they can go, right? So I think that's where, so if there's stakeholders here who are from the state FA or from the All India Football Federation or football clubs as well, I think this is the time where we need to sort of introspect and see what are we doing to create that ecosystem and that pathway, which, I mean, again, like Gaurav mentioned, right, in cricket it's so very easily visible. You know immediately when you go to a cricket coaching camp that, okay, if you do well here, there's going to be selections at this time of the year, there's going to be this thing. There's a calendar, there's a structure to the sport, right? That's exactly what's required in football as well. I hope that answered the question to a...
Kind of question here, a little more honest. And I know that what you said, Raj, if I may just continue, that it's about them having fun while playing and knowing the game. And that's the whole idea, because if you don't have a good coach who can actually take you through that experience, they will not know if they really want to play it. And I come from an emotional background. I'm an EI expert, so I understand it really well. And I'm also part of the sports coaching. So that's why I'm very interested to understand, if you like you just mentioned, that we go into cricket, we know it A to Z. But if you want to take some local sport like hockey, we don't know where to go to the next, to the next, to the next. And in fact, I would just thank all of you. And since who is also here, I would request them to create a hub so that we can actually get some guidance from there and be contributing as a community and do the Saturday, Sunday. And that is a mindset shift and the culture shift that we would want to. Thank you.
Raj?
Gaurav, this is for you. We've heard all of you speak about where Indian football is headed. I used to think that satellite television damaged Indian football, damaged Indian sport a lot because we started watching a lot of European football and we produced a lot of kids who were college footballers. But from what you guys have just shared, things are changing. What, according to you, are the two challenges that India faces to realize this dream of awakening the Blue Tigers and playing that World Cup?
Okay. Again, I go back to one of my earlier answers. I think it kind of ties in with what Ma'am was also talking about, right? About the need for all this participation that we currently have in the sport, and football is a sport where there is a lot of participation that is taking place. How can we channelize that participation where the kids are also having fun, where the kids are playing a lot, and then turn that into avenues for them to take that to a higher level? And that can only happen if that pyramid that we all keep talking about is actually a step pyramid rather than a proper triangle. And you need that step, because I think even clubs like Odisha and FC Goa need to be fed. Players need to come to them from somewhere, right? So I think it starts with the government. I think it starts with the education system in schools. Because that is where you're going to find the biggest catchment of these kids who will have an opportunity on a weekly basis to participate in sports, to play, maybe have the physical education period twice a week, 3 times a week. That's the first time, where I was exposed to sport, for example, and I started playing. Then it comes to the neighborhood that you're in, whether you're going out, whether you have enough time, whether your parents are encouraging you to go out there and participate. Once you get, regularly, once you participate regularly, after that comes and this is where I think we are currently lacking, is whether you are being able to be spotted, right? We currently, are in a situation where you'll be really lucky to make it to the professional level because you get spotted by somebody. I'll give my own example. Within a matter of 7 months from going in, bowling my first ball or playing my first shot at the age of 10 for a local cricket club in Shepherd's Bush, London, I went to play for the county of Middlesex at the age group level. It all happened within 7 months because someone saw me playing for that local club. They saw me and they invited me for the West London, area matches. I played 3 matches for them. Someone spotted me, invited me to come for Middlesex's indoor trials, winter trials at North Finchley. I went there, did 8 weeks indoor trials, would travel once a week and go there. And then I made it to the full squad by the end of that entire 6-7 month process. In India, that is something that is currently lacking, and that organization is what is lacking, where there are not enough scouts, not enough coaches, and I think along with the players, to tap into that participation that we are now beginning to see, we need to organize that. And I think that starts right from the home, it starts from the schools. I think the government has a big role to play, and I think, it's so apt that we're in Odisha because I think the government here is doing an absolutely wonderful job when it comes to encouraging sports. And I think if we can get that in other states as well around the country, I think we could be really onto something.
So anybody else? We probably might have time for just one question, or too many hands over there. Yeah, yes sir, please.
Hello. My question is to Gaurav. Gaurav, I'm Colonel Rajesh. I'm one of the technical directors in the department. I was just interested in knowing the word Holy Grail when you have written in your book, because for the fact we know that till now nobody has achieved that Holy Grail. Nobody is able to find that Holy Grail. So how do you give us a impossible target by naming it as a Holy Grail, and we quest for it and we find for it?
Okay, so we actually thought about it a lot, and there was a reason why we called it the Holy Grail and why we didn't call it the World Cup. I think personally, each of us has our own Holy Grail, right? So for kid A, the Holy Grail could be to play for the national team. For kid B, is just to go out there and play and enjoy the sport. For kid C, it could be, becoming a professional player and providing for his family. So each one of us has his own Holy Grail that we're looking for, and which is why we called it, Holy Grail as opposed to calling out the World Cup per se. So you're free to define what your own Holy Grail is within the footballing ecosystem.
Thank you. Let this be the last question. Yes.
I'm Vinod Mishra, athlete coach. First question to Mr. Ravi. Sir, you were talking about entering into the foreign clubs, Indian player entering into the foreign clubs. What makes us to stop? What are the problems you feel? Talent or psychological problems, physiological or motor qualities, what a sportsman need? What do you exactly feel where we lack? Because human being is a human being, we have got same everything, where we are lacking. Another question to Mr. Gaurav. As you were telling me, Dravid was having 6-7 people pooled to select a team of 11 or 15, whatever it is. What is the problem that we are not having a pool of 400 or 300 in football to again bring them up?
If I can just go first. So actually, it's a great question that you asked, like what is lacking, because obviously the players, so I'll paraphrase Arsene Wenger. So the three of us were fortunate enough to have interacted with him not more than a couple of weeks ago. And the first thing he said is, when a child is at the age of, say, 1 year old, and say a child is born in Mumbai, or say he's born in Bhubaneswar, and a child is born in Paris, what's the difference between that child and this child? Both stand an equal chance of becoming a professional footballer, correct? At the age of 3, does that change much? No. The change begins to happen at the ages of 10, 12, 14, correct? The difference is, at that point in time, that child has had a lot more exposure. He's had better education from a sporting perspective and from a non-sporting perspective as well, which means he's been provided a lot more opportunities. So if a child is constantly training frequently, you're developing not just his physical capabilities, but also his mental skills, because you're allowing a child to compete and asking him to figure out solutions for himself. You're building his mental capacity. Like for example, the Indian football players, they played a couple of matches against Qatar, etc. and so forth in the past couple of weeks, right? They competed, physically they competed. If I pull out the data charts, you'll see that the Indian football player ran 11 kilometers, so did the Qatari player, right? Or perhaps there can even be cases when the Qatari player ran less. What was the difference? The 10 odd kilometers that the Qatari player ran for, he knew exactly what he wanted to do even before he got the ball, right? The Indian player is reacting to the situation. The Qatari player is already 2 steps ahead of the situation. The only reason is because he's done it so many times over and over again that he's replayed that scenario in his head. So if a player is given that opportunity to constantly compete, figure out solutions for himself, and he's doing that over years and years and years, you'll see it. There's a very famous phrase that in football that goes that to develop a professional football player, they need to have 10,000 training hours, right? It's a bit of a cliche because everybody keeps saying it, but honestly it does stand true, and it's not just in football, it stands true in every sport. The more approach, access and infrastructure and right coaching they have, the more probable it is that the player will increase his talent. Will every single one of them become a professional football player? Probably not. But will there be an opportunity for somebody to stand up? Definitely yes.
Gaurav?
Yeah, and you know, the second question that you asked, I think it's got to do, and it's a continuation of what Ravi was saying. The kid in Paris has probably already, by the time he turns 12, has probably already played 300, 400 competitive matches, whether it's at school, whether it's at a local club, and there is a system, a scouting system in place to identify that child. In India, what we did for the 2017 FIFA World Cup, we identified those children when they were 14, 15 years old. We put them together, we housed them together, they went and played, they trained every day together. Now, when you're 14, 15 years old, you know, you don't know what you want to do in life. I mean, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was 14, 13 years old. Now, you could lose interest by the time the under-17 tournament comes, you could get injured, there are so many different factors involved. So, for us to build that pool of 200, 300, and then you pick the best just maybe a month before the tournament when you're selecting your squad, you need to identify all of that talent around the country. So it's not just about having that talent. We all know the talent is there. You know, we keep hearing this, we're 1.4 billion strong and why can't we produce 11 players? It's not about producing 11 players. It's about producing 11,000 players, probably, you know, 11 lakh players in the country, and then identifying who are the best. Right now we get the best and we put them together. And you know, circumstances change before a tournament comes around, before a season comes around. You know, every match week to match week, the situation changes, as both of these gentlemen sitting to my right will tell you. So what we need is to work at every step of that ecosystem. You know, the players are important, but people like you said you're a coach, you know, equally important, if not more important, right? The physiotherapist, the educationist, all that entire ladder that a player needs to climb from the age of 5 onwards is something that needs to be developed in this country for us to then start competing with that kid in Paris.
Right. Yes, please.
I just wanted to add, going along the football educational side, when we were at Watford in 2006, we joined up with a local academy, and we brought in children from 11 years of age all the way through, paid for their education, but they played for Watford Football Club, irrespective of their ability. If at 14, 15 they weren't good enough, we didn't discard them, and we'd bring in about 100 children every year. This is in 2006 that we started this, and what you found was that we controlled their nutrition, we controlled their diets, everything, and every time there was a break, they were coached. At lunchtime, they were coached. After school, they were coached. And Man City are doing this now, Liverpool are doing, many clubs across the country are doing this. So I think we also need to, whilst we're talking about the scouting and all the other sides, we've got to look at this as well. And I think the FIFA inauguration here in conjunction with the AIFF is possibly the start, possibly. But that's where we need to be if in 14 years' time we want to see India progress. Otherwise, we could potentially be having these conversations again. So there has to be an intent as well.
It's a quick closing comment from everybody. I mean, Ravi asked me when we were in the green room how tough it's going to be. You know, I'm going to make for them, but not really. I've not done anything of that. So, but now this question might be a little tough for you. When are we going to awaken the tiger? When is the tiger going to wake up? Or in short, when do you see India play or qualify for the World Cup?
Honestly, the answer is very simple. It's essentially what Raj and Gaurav have sort of brought out earlier. The only way when, I don't think anybody has a date. It's great to set targets in the 2034 World Cup or the 2050 World Cup. Global footballing scenario changes. Now all of a sudden it's a lot more achievable because there's more teams in the World Cup. But if you genuinely want to get there on merit, what you have to do is precisely, I'm just going to copy a line that Raj used earlier. If other countries are working at 50%, we need to be working at 100%. Because they're developing the sport, right? They're breaking barriers which have not been done before, right? They're setting new trends, new standards. The only way we can even catch up, we need to work at double the speed. So the moment the ecosystem gets together, that's not just people who are sitting in the boardrooms, not just football clubs, it needs to come right from the very top. It requires the government to get behind it. It requires the parent at the age of 3 to start taking an interest in the child's education in sport. Not football, just in any sport in general. That is when you will see that there's a possibility of...
He very smartly stayed away from the number. Raj, 2034, is it a reality? We started with that, we end with that.
I'll go with what Ravi just said there. I mean, he's articulated that so well, I don't think I can add to that really. He's nailed it. He's right. We don't know, but I'll go with it.
Right.
I'll give you a number.
Please.
All right? Okay. The number for me is the 4 and the 5-year-olds of today. And every year, we need to focus on the 4 and 5-year-olds of that year. Because the way I look at it is, it's the 4 and 5-year-olds of today who are going to help us qualify 20 years down the line when they reach their peak. When they're 24, they're 26, when they're 27. So each year we need to create that batch of those 4 and 5-year-olds. So that's the number for you. If we can focus on those 4 and 5-year-olds every year, I think maybe in 20, 30, 40 years, the tiger will be fully awakened. I think the eyes are beginning to open.
Not exactly the number they're looking for. Nonetheless, it's quite a number. That's fine. But we only hope that the tiger wakes up as quickly as it does, and let's support. It has to be a collective, collaborative effort. Thank you, gentlemen. Ravi, Raj, and Gaurav. Absolute pleasure, and you've been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
I'd like to thank all our panelists and our moderator for such a riveting session. I request them to kindly stay on the stage. We have a small token of appreciation that we'd like to extend you. Thank you so much for asking. I just bring them. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I request all of you to kindly put your hands together for our panelists and our moderator. And what a wonderful session this has been. Thank you so much.